we now as humans, we create suffering unnecessarily, in excess, and with zero reverence. And that's their issue with us.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Reinforce the Horse. Today we are here with Jordanna Anawalt, and Jo is a Hoopa woman descending from the Hoopa Valley tribe of Northern California. She acknowledges that the beautiful Central Oregon land that she currently resides and works upon is the original homelands of the Confederate tribes of Warm Springs, who ceded the land in the Treaty of 1855. Jo works as a Congruent Communication Coach with humans and horses, a medicine drumming guide, an artist, a story holder, and a communication channel for those without spoken language. She is the creator of Equine Experiential InnerStanding and the specialization of CHOICE Horsemanship. Her work focuses on guiding humans and horses to oneness by revitalizing Indigenous approaches to live in harmony with the natural world. She is an enrolled member of the Hoopa Valley tribe of Northern California. She has Indigenous ancestry in the Toloa Dini Nation of Northern California and the geographic nations of Azores, Yucatan, and Scotland. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I am having a wonderful day. I'm excited to chat with you guys.
Oh, I'm so glad. Would you like to give us a bit more of a rundown of who you are and where your journey with horses began?
Yeah, I'd love to. So since I can remember, I've been in love with horses. And when I was a child, that was came in the form of Breyer horse figurines. We lived in an area where I couldn't actually interact with real horses, and we didn't have the financial capability. So Breyer horses were my horse time every day. I was a kid who didn't play with dolls or Barbies. I played with Breyer horses. And my parents had both grown up being avid equestrians.
So everybody knows Alyssa's eyes just lit up like the 4th of July when she's mentioning the Breyer horses. So we'll definitely get into that.
I'm sure. Yeah, for sure.
About
that. Yeah, I had a huge collection. Dolls and things like that just got thrown in the trash. I did not want to interact with anything that was not in the shape of a horse. So, and as a kid, I didn't question it, but it was just always there. I loved anything that was horse-shaped, horse energy, horse sound. You know, we'd be driving down the road and I'd, yell when we drive by horses and beg my mom to pull over so I could get out and click and see if they'd come over to me. There was just something magical about them, something that lit my soul on fire from a very young age. So both my parents grew up owning horses and were equestrians, and my grandparents and my great-grandparents' horses were a part of our family for several generations. So my siblings and I were the first generation where they just weren't present. And I always knew in some way they'd be involved in my life, but as I came through adolescence, it shifted in my mind to being more that the horse would kind of be like a spirit guide, like an animal that was like the animal that I resonated with, and that I didn't need necessarily to have a horse or to interact with physical horses because I felt that I carried that energy within my own being. And then fast forward to right about the time I was 15. And at that point, I had gone through a multi-year battle with major depression and with the choice to try to end my life, and had spent a lot of time connecting with the natural world to find peace within myself, to find that sense of belonging that I didn't feel with people, that I only felt when I was with animals or out in the forest. And where we lived at the time, there was this vacant lot between my high school and my house. And there was nothing on it, no buildings, just a vacant lot. And one day, this young horse appeared there. And she was beautiful. She was a buttermilk buckskin filly. I now know that at the time that I first saw her, she was about 9 months old. And that was in the foothills of California, and it was in spring. So warm, but not hot yet. And so as the spring passed and we went into summer, my daily ritual became walking my rescue dog down the road because she needed a long walk, walking her all the way down and taking carrots to this young horse. Again, I wasn't a horse person. I didn't know things. Like it was strange that this 8-month-old horse was all by herself, that where were the other horses, and there was no one living on the property, and no one was feeding her, and the grass was dying and everything was slowly disappearing. And I had no idea that was actually going to be the biggest blessing, was my lack of knowledge. Because as it got hotter and that summer progressed, there was no more forage left, and she started to wither away. And I remember one day I went down there and she had cut her ear on the barbed wire fence. And there was like the little flies were in it, and there was the beginning of an infection. And I had met a young woman at the time who did have horses. And so I called her and asked her, and she walked me through how to vet that ear. So here I am, 15, trespassing onto someone's land to go in and try to clean this young mare's ear out. With no knowledge of what I'm doing. Just this deep trust and connection. Like we were so bonded. When I would drive my car to and from school or to and from work, I would roll down my window, and I had named her at that point, Honeybee. So I'd Honeybee out the window, and she would gallop up and down the fence line. And so I have a really distinct, first car. The sound was really distinct. It was a Suzuki Samurai, so she could hear it coming from a ways away. And she, we got to the point where before I even came into sight, she was galloping, and then I'd get up to where I could see her, and she's whinnying, and we'd go back and forth together. And this was my horse. Didn't own her, had no rights to her, but this was my horse. And I remember making that statement to my mom at one point. I'm like, Mom, like I've met my horse. And she kind of laughed and was like, we don't have horse property. We can't afford a horse. Okay, Jordanna, that's your horse. And one day it had gotten so bad, like her water trough had a couple inches of moss sitting on top of it. She'd have to push the moss down to get to the water, and there was no food. So she was gnawing on a stick that she'd pulled out of a tree. And so I ended up calling the Humane Society and just sending some pictures and saying, I'm concerned that there's no food or water available to this horse. She looks really thin. The neighbors across the street had started talking to me because they were like, oh, is this your horse? You come and see her every day. We see you in there with her. And I was like, no, I'm just some kid who's visiting her. And they supported my call to the Humane Society, and someone was dispatched out, and I got a huge scolding from law enforcement that I was not allowed to be trespassing, that this wasn't my horse. I shouldn't be feeding her, because at that point I had gone and bought a bale of hay and set it next to the fence and was throwing her hay every day. The neighbors had run a hose across the street so I could fill the water trough. Like I was trying to make sure that this young mare had what she needed, because I had such a strong heart connection to her. And they put a 30-day hold on her. So they found the owners somehow, and she was required to stay there for 30 days. And I was told by the animal control officer, you are not allowed to have contact with this animal anymore. And I just broke me. And I still would drive by her every day, and she'd run up and down the fence. And it was so confusing to both of us that we couldn't physically connect anymore. And then there was this level of additional confusion because we were still connected. And that, at that point in my understanding of being able to communicate with non-human animals and with the natural world, wasn't clear that that's what was happening. So there was all this confusion and grief around the situation that was so far out of our control, which then felt like a repeat of some of the situations in my life that had led to my depression. So it was this really difficult month of my life. And I remember the day that I drove by and she was gone. There was no horse in the field anymore. And it became this relentless fire in my soul to figure out where she'd gone. And I would spend my afternoons after school driving around the countryside with the window down, calling her name. It went on for a couple weeks. And then one day I heard her whinny back, and I could see the tips of her little ears over like a 6-foot fence on the back of someone's property. I could see them, and I kept calling her name, and she kept whinnying back. And I just turned 16. I remember the look on the owner's face when she opened the door. And I was like, I would like to buy my horse from you. And it became a back and forth. Every day I showed up there, they were, I'm sure, quite irritated with me. But I wasn't, like, Honey and I were supposed to be together. And they had all these reasons why they wouldn't let her go. And all of these goals or ideations that they had for her future. But at the end of the day, I kept throwing back up at them, right? But you just let her sit without food and water and turn into a skeleton, and she got an ear infection. Like, if all of those things really matter, then how could that happen? And I showed up every day and asked, can I please buy her? They wanted some absurd amount of money for her. When they finally agreed, fine, we'll sell her to you. And I was like, no, that doesn't really work, actually. Here's what I was thinking. So I negotiated Honey's adoption fee down below $1,000. And I remember the day that was official, I went home and I was like, Mom, I have to buy a horse trailer. And we have to find out where I'm going to put the horse. And my mom was so graceful about it. She was like, okay, well, we'll find a new place to live. And so she started looking for a new rental property. I started looking for a horse trailer. Both those things came into being very quickly because it was what was supposed to happen. I was supposed to become the guardian of Honey. And from that relationship, Honey is now 16. She lives on her homestead in Hawaii. But that relationship is a rock in the river of life for me. And come to find out, she was orphaned at 2 weeks old. So she didn't learn any social behavior from other horses. She was by herself on a vacant piece of property. So her prey instinct got overridden by more of a predator behavior first. And we spent the next several years fumbling through what communication, both of our communication blocks. So she didn't communicate like a horse, and I didn't really communicate like a balanced or congruent human. And so we butted heads a lot. And I ended up moving with her when she was 3 years old. I brought her to Oregon. And at that point, I was terrified of her. She is a horse who still to this day will look at you with the softest, kindest eye, with her ears forward and attentive. And you will have no warning when she is going to turn and double barrel at you with full force, or bite you and take you out. So there's a clip in the Buck Brannaman movie Buck, and there's a Palomino stallion that is very fight forward in his behavior. So he opts for fight first, also an orphan. And I remember when that movie came out, I was here in Oregon and I was working with a new trainer and who became my mentor. And when that movie came out and that scene came up in the theater and we're sitting there watching it, and she like grabbed my arm and we got out of the movie and she was like, "That is your horse." And she says, "That is why I told you when I met you and her that you had two options. One, you can keep this horse for the rest of her life and promise to dedicate everything you do with her to ensuring her safety and her protection because she will not be understood. And this will be a life-changing process for the both of you. Or you need to say goodbye and set up an appointment to euthanize her because she's dangerous." And she is a very experienced horsewoman, is a peer of Buck Brannaman, grew up riding with Harry Whitney and the Dorrance brothers. And I trusted that she knew what she was talking about. And I could feel the fear in myself. I had been taken out by Honey and I had a healthy level of caution around her, which was making it no longer fun. And I had to think about that option. I knew that I wasn't going to put her down, but that what she was telling me was that this wasn't actually about training Honey or shifting Honey's behavior. It wasn't about the horse. This was about the human. This was going to be a journey, a path of me stepping back and looking how I approach situations, how I respond to situations, how I'm triggered or react in the face of something instantaneously. And that I was still young. And that seemed like a really big commitment to make, but it was the only commitment that really was on the table. So we went down that path. I kept her and, tasks that I'd have to do that were riding Honey wasn't even on the table. Like that wasn't even what we were doing. It was just like, can you go in and put the blanket on the horse without hysterically crying? And I was like, no, I think she's going to kill me. And so getting to the place where I could even enter the pen and maintain a rhythmic breath pattern. Play a story in my head that was a story of Honey standing peaceably, of her being relaxed when I approached with the blanket, rather than the story, which was looping through my mind of, I'm going to approach, she's going to push me with her shoulder into the fence, then she's going to turn and she's going to kick me, and then I'm going to be in the hospital, and I think I'm going to have a brain injury, and I'm probably not going to be able to come. Like, I would go down this rabbit hole so far because we had these incidents where I'd been injured by her. And the tasks that I was learning, the lessons I was having at that time, they weren't horsemanship lessons. They weren't lessons of even horsemanship. They were life lessons with Honey. And
did those lessons present themselves to you originally as kind of surface level? You're like what you just explained, going into the pen, putting a blanket on, and then you getting anxiety and these fears and start creeping up. Did it present itself to you that way? And then as time went on, you started to perhaps uncover a deeper source?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes, that is exactly what happened. At that time, it was a very visceral, physical fear of, I know what it feels like to be kicked, to be bit, to be run over, and not just from her. I was at that point training, like working as a mentee under the trainer, and I was learning how to teach riding and teach natural horsemanship. I had a debilitating injury in my career at that time, which was I was a professional snowboard trainer, and I injured my legs and I wasn't able to do my job for 2 years. And so during that 2-year time, I'm in a wheelchair and a walker. I live at the barn because I work off some of Honey's expenses, taking care of the whole barn. And so I just start to follow, I'm just with the trainer all the time, watching everything that's happening. And I got to work with horses that triggered that same feeling that I got when I go in with Honey. But with Honey, I could just think about her. And it's still so strange to think about that. I don't have fear with her anymore. I understand her, and I understand how much of a mirror she is to me in my state, and that those times where I feel really afraid of her, she's actually really afraid that I feel anxious or that I feel uncertain. And so then her behavior is this mirror of like, why are you acting so incongruent? You're freaking me out. But I could think of Honey and I would get scared. I could be on in a different physical location and think about her. And I had this deep, deep love, this soulmate bond with her. And then fear that I might actually really get hurt. And the other horses that I interacted with, even though a lot of them had severe behavioral issues, they came from neglect situations or abuse situations. So I was interacting with horses that had high reactivity, fast responses. There was peace in between in our interaction, where with Honey, there was no peace. And the reason there was no peace was because I wasn't at peace. There was no peace in me. And so as our relationship evolved, tasks that I'd be given to do would be like, okay, you're going to hold the lead rope and you are not allowed to look behind you, and you're going to start jogging to the other side of the arena, but you can't look behind you. And then you're just going to stop really fast. And I would just like melt to the ground in the arena, hysterically kind of like, I can't run in front of her. She's going to run me over. I really did believe that I couldn't trust her, which wasn't I couldn't trust her. I couldn't trust myself. I didn't trust any other human. I didn't trust the world. I didn't trust situations. And these tasks that my trainer gave me at the time to do, that really are very simple tasks physically, but emotionally and mentally, they were like climbing Mount Everest. And when I finally was able to start to break through that, to push through that, and to see in real time the shift that happened in Honey and my relationship, I knew that there was something more to this, and that her presence in my life wasn't to be a horse in the like common or the typical role. This was a different type of relationship. So enter more horses. I very quickly started to accumulate more horses. And they all had come from backgrounds of abuse or neglect as well. And I went from being a kid who had no access to horses to a teenager who adopted this orphaned lion in a horse body, to a horse girl, who had a herd, and started to go down this path of sharing the skills that I had developed as a snowboard trainer. So I loved that job because I got to teach people how to become aware of their own body's movements, of their own thoughts and their stories they were telling themselves, and of how the piece of equipment was interacting with their body and with the snow. It's called movement analysis. And I took it a level deeper by talking with my students and then the professionals that I was also training, that, this concept of visualization that we hear a lot about in sports, right? To visualize what you want. It's really powerful, but it's not just a mental thing. It's not just to visualize the image. It's an embodiment. Visualization or manifestation is an embodied experience. It comes from all of the senses. And I was really, really good at my job because I'm empathic. I can feel things quickly. I can watch something occur in front of me. It comes in through all of my senses, in through my natural guidance center, which is in Pico or the navel. And then I can feel what the whole experience is, and my brain then will process it, and I can share it back out to teach someone how to step into that space themselves. And so this was really easy to translate over to the horses. This same concept. I could watch people ride. I could watch students do things on the ground. I could watch a horse behaving in a field with another set of horses. Like, body language made complete sense. It was just movement analysis. But horses are sentient beings. They're not a piece of sports equipment. They're not a snowboard. They're not skis. And that became a really big disconnect, like energetically for me, very fast. Once I got into this realm of teaching natural horsemanship and teaching riding, was that I was watching people have stories about horses, have stories about horsemanship, about their equestrian activities, about themselves, that were structured in the framework of recreational sports or competitive sports. And that just that felt so incongruent, that the horses don't fit into that. They're alive.
You mentioned that word congruency again, which, can you talk more about that? What is your take and feeling on being congruent?
Yeah, I'd love to share that. So congruence is a place of whole being or whole system balance. So when you look at the natural world is always seeking to find a place of congruence where all systems, all structures, all beings are playing their part or contributing into the whole in a way that keeps the whole moving fluidly and moving fluidly. We have congruence within self. We have congruence in other. We have congruence in the whole. And horses, that is the number one quality that horses are seeking, is congruence. Congruence is a feeling of safety. Congruence is a place to operate from. It's neutral. So I saw this happening when the horses were just out in the paddock and the people weren't around, but that a car would pull in and things would start to shift. And I didn't understand what it was. And then I noticed, okay, well, I can be also in a place where I feel really neutral, where I feel that my mind, so my thoughts, my emotions, my physical body, and my energy body, they're all communicating in a way that it's fluid. There's not, body isn't contradicting mind isn't contradicting emotion. So a great way to think about this is that how many times in life, in our modern structures and systems, do we get presented with a situation or a choice, and we know we make a decision here, but our heart or our gut might say, I don't know about that. I think, and you'll get it. Sometimes you'll get a really strong, like gut feeling, visceral feeling. Or your heart is like, gosh, I really don't, that's really not what I want to do. But your mind is like, but it's the smart thing and it's what will be accepted and it's what you should do. And your mind comes up with all of these really great reasons why listening to your intuition or your heart isn't a good choice. And we live in a society that rewards that. It actually teaches that. And
that's part of what I would consider the severe issue that we have with broken masculinity within our world. As a man, to come to the table with that and say, like, I'm an empath, I'm a Libra. I have just recently learned, not long ago, my more feminine qualities, and largely growing up, that would be like, I'm, tilting more toward like the sex aspect, like I'm a woman then, or I have these woman or female qualities. What I've learned through the horses and what it sounds like you're saying is that they demonstrate congruency in like that almost perfect equilibrium, at least in practice, of the masculine and feminine qualities at work in balance.
yes, that is most certainly a part of it. And congruence can be looked at. You can put the concept of congruence on any aspect or characteristic of a situation, of a being, of an environment. Congruence is the way that we are naturally wired to exist. And horses exist that way. So even if you're interacting with horses that were born in domestication, they are still seeking to live in a state of congruence with themselves, with their herd or the other beings in their area, and then with the environment. And that doesn't mean, congruence doesn't mean that there is not going to be experiences of suffering or experiences where incongruence is spending more time in the present, in the experience, but it's that you're always seeking to come back to that, and that the structure supports that, and that that is where safety, that's where authenticity starts from. And so as humans, we come into the world this way. We're born with this sense of congruence, and it's only through our early experiences. So, we see this as children too. I watch children experience this, and then I think back to my childhood. I'm like, oh yeah, I totally was picking up on that. Right? So you've got these multiple bodies, and you've got eyes that are a part of your physical body that are very much connected to your cognition. And we might see our parents interacting in a certain way. We might hear them saying a certain thing back and forth, and we hear the words, but we then also hear the tone, and the tone is incongruent with the words. And then because we're still so close to that place of congruence when we're young, we also then are picking up on the energy coming off of the situation. So we're like, the words, the energy of the words, those don't match. The body language doesn't match what mom and dad are saying. And it doesn't have to be mom and dad. It could be other situations you're watching. It happens in peer groups. It then starts to happen within yourself, where you start learning or being rewarded for overriding what your energy body, so your intuition and your heart connection, are saying, because what is upheld or encouraged is to follow what's coming through cognition. What can you see, touch, measure, quantify? And it's not important if it interferes or is opposed to what you're feeling in your heart or in your intuition, because those things you can't see. It's, imaginary friends are okay when you're little, and then all of a sudden it's not okay anymore. You can't have imaginary friends. Well, that's congruence. That's operating with your whole system open. That's the place of congruence that I'm helping show people that the horses exist in, and that the horse is like, come on, wake up, humans. Come back to that place where you live in the whole being, in the whole sensory body, where imaginary friends are actually there because it's the horse communicating to you. It's the tree spirit sharing information about grounding. So congruence is that equilibrium point.
It's so interesting that you bring it up that way, because back in your story when you said that you got a scolding from law enforcement about the situation with Honeybee, it sparked my mind of well, that is conditioning of society of saying silence your intuition and silence your willingness to peer into what's truly going on. And I come from a military background, so it's shut up and color, so wow, it's really profound.
Yeah. And that's what I'm just what I get to do every day with horses and humans in the natural world is so rad. Because as I go through this work too, I'll remember something from when I was young, or a situation that I watched one of my siblings go through or a friend went through. And I have a completely different, I can step over to the side and I can look at it through a different perspective, seeing as right, that conditioning, that being congruent is not advantageous to create success or well-being in the definition that the large society places upon those things. Well-being, and that's what then the horses did start to show me, was do you see the connections between how we live our lives, Jordanna? And do you see the connection between how Indigenous cultures all over the world, doesn't matter where, and by Indigenous, I mean land-based societies, groups of people who still live very close to the land, where they are basing their daily work, their seasonal work, their yearly work on the rhythms and the cycles of the natural world, and that they're guided first and foremost by nature and by spirit, not by policy, politics, systems. They are looking inward and to community being human, animal, and nature, for the blueprint on how to move forward. And so when the horses, at the time, I didn't realize the horses were communicating with me. So I'm oh, I've been communicating with animals, right? My whole life, and with the natural world. It came when I was younger as a knowing, a gut feeling, or it would come in my body and I'd have physical responses in my body that seemed sudden and strange, but that were linked to what was happening in the situation. I was dropped in information all the time. I just thought that I was having these genius thoughts. I was oh, this is the coolest thing. Let me write this down and draw a picture. This is so awesome. No, it was the horses dropping stuff in, just in the way that I was able to receive the information at the time. I wasn't ready to start hearing a horse talking. I would have lost my marbles at that point. I had to get to a place where I was congruent enough most of the time to be able to receive information that way. And these two pieces of the horse's life way and Indigenous culture's life way had this really strong link. And that was this point when I said, because up to that point, I had been a natural horsemanship riding instructor, and I trained horses. I really didn't like my job. I loved getting to go outside after all the clients left and walk around our ranch and be barefoot and go out and dance with the horses and watch the moon and make coffee and sit with them. Like, I loved being around the horses. And so my life, my job afforded me that opportunity. But I really didn't like teaching people to dominate horses. And we did it in a way that I still feel in that discipline of horsemanship was really, really soft and really humane. But it was one of those horses who put the stop to that, and very loudly, he's the first one I ever heard speak, said, "You're treating us like slaves. And just as your people were colonized, you are exploiting us for your own gain. And we don't want to do this anymore." And that stopped me in my tracks. And that was then that piece coming in with watching their life way and looking at the Indigenous practices and how those were so congruent that so there has to be a different way. And there is. But it's not about the horse. It's just like making changes in society aren't about changing society. They're about changing the choices you make. If we have an issue with pollution or with animals being slaughtered, well, then we can make choices to stop buying meat at the grocery store and start using a local butcher and or buying animals ourselves and raising them and slaughtering them and going through the process, having connection to our food and the process, the system through which it comes to us to eat. We can change the way that we commute. And yeah, that choice might mean that that's a lot more work, that you've got to get up earlier.
Oh my goodness. I love that you bring that up. So man, that resonates with me so much. Everything that you've just said. I have a few questions for you, actually. But to piggyback off of what you just mentioned, we have 3 horses, 2 of which are wild Mustangs from the White River, Nevada. And these 2 horses went through hell, literally, to get to where they are now we have 10 acres of land, but they all share about an acre paddock. And Ashley Avis recently did a documentary called Wild Beauty. And Dad and I watched this film, and I was so beyond touched by the amount of emotion that was put into this film and the amount of reality that was put into this film. After we finished it around 10-ish at night, I walked out to the paddock. I was bawling, crying, and I fell to my knees where Willow, my Mustang, came up to me and put her face, her nose was touching my face, next to Grace, her sister, I guess, the other Mustang, was standing, and then Cody, our Bashkir Curly domestic, was behind me. Dad was sitting on my left, and I held my hands in prayer pose, and I told them, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And in that moment, I made this decision. I said, I'm not going to eat meat. I can't do it. If you had to be put through that so that meat could be put on my table, so that dairy can be put on my table, I won't do it. It's just, to me, it's cruel. And on top of that, the meat and the dairy industry, in my mind, is messed up. I don't understand it. And so I love that you bring up that amount. What I'm hearing you say is there's this amount of respect that needs to go into these animals that are providing us with this food that we as humans in our modern day don't typically take the time to acknowledge. We don't see them as living, breathing individuals. We see them as, the meat and the dairy that they produce.
Yes, exactly. It's nature-based societies, which we all come from. So when I say we are all indigenous, every human walking on the face of this earth, we are. One, we're all indigenous to Mother Earth. We're all human beings. But to take it a step farther, we all, no matter the color of our skin or how close, in the timeline, we can trace our bloodline back to a specific place. I can go back to a place right now, and I can sit on a piece of land and know that this is where the blood that I have in my body in this lifetime, I don't know what it was last time, but in this lifetime, that's where I descend from. Other people, that might be 400 to 800 years ago, where they could go back and be like, that's where I originate from. That's my indigenous roots. But there was a time where every human being walking the face of this earth lived in a land-based system where we relied upon what the stars were laying out for us, what the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun told us about seasonal changes, where the animals were migrating and why we needed to follow. And we had reverence. Everything was done in a place of ceremony. When I go out to cut firewood, even though those trees are by observation dead, they still are rooted into the ground. They're still a part of the system that are communicating with the other trees and the other plant life around. They might be providing a home for another animal, and they were in their full space of aliveness an energy. And so I asked permission to cut down the tree. When I go out and I want to pick wildflowers or I want to pick medicine, I ask permission. And I only pick or take if there's enough left for there to be a continued supply for generations forward. And that this then ripples out into food. If I am going to consume animal products, there is a very deep connection that the connection between life and death is beautiful. Death is beautiful. It is a transition of form. It is 1/4 of the cycle that is so commonly, again, in this type of system, this Western, very isolated, linear cognitive system, feared. We really try to stay out of that cycle. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to interact with it. And not even just physical death, but finality of anything, finality of a job, finality of being a teenager, finality of a relationship is something we steer away from. That's not natural. Being the hand to set the snare, with intention that I am going to be so deeply grateful that Rabbit has offered their life for me to be able to sustain my body and to sustain, my family's body, to be able to create, maybe some sort of clothing, to use the entire animal, that takes the sadness away from the loss of life, and that we just aren't taught that. And that's what horses taught me, was, getting to be there during end of life transitions, was that there's, right, like, okay, so your body's not moving anymore, but you're still here. How is that possible? What's going on? And that you can feel that when you interact with anything in the natural world that is having that transitional experience. But it's ceremony, it's reverence for what we're doing, and it's a choice. So if we have problems with things, like big problems, system problems outside of ourselves, you have a choice. What can you do to change how you're moving through the world? And if you can make the choice, if you can be accountable, if you have the willpower to do that, you are strengthening the energetic vibration of that choice so that others who might not have had the strength or the willpower to make the choice, they'll come along on the ride too. So it moves beyond even opinion on what's right or wrong, or I think this, I think that. It's right. It's just, well, how do you want to live? What kind of world do you want to live in? Make choices that align with that. Don't worry about what other people are doing. You are holding that energy. You are moving through life with that intention, and that's powerful. It's the stone being thrown into the pond that ripples out. Be the stone. The ripples are happening. So are we making choices that are rippling out, that continue to perpetuate the problems that we all have, problems with, like the rounding up of, wild horses? I also have an issue with that. So I can then make choices to support. How can I as an individual support, Mustangs? How can I support the health and welfare of public and wild lands? I'm not trying to go out and change the system. I'm trying to make choices within myself and then talk to people around me that can make the same choices. And if enough of us do that, there'll be a change.
I agree so much. And it's like, so you mentioned the vibration, and I know a lot of people would consider that woo woo and really far fetched. I don't. I would have years ago. The idea that we make, and this has been taught thousands of years across many, many different cultures all over the planet. True change comes from within. And as we make those internal choices, just what you're saying, our vibratory rate changes, and regardless of the actual change that occurs on the surface that we can see, the ripple effect is such. I mean, we're seeing the ripple effects of people ignoring that for so long and getting away from those indigenous roots. And I think one of the 7 deadly sins is gluttony. And one of the things that I've found and contemplated a lot about human existence these days is our gluttonous nature, and not just from a food perspective, but how we are so caught up in feeding our gut, figuratively and literally. And I think a lot of people, even listening to this, might think, well, the stereotypes come up like, oh, tree hugging hippies, or we have to eat, or something like that. And it misses the mark completely. I didn't become a vegetarian until I slaughtered my first pig. How many people go into the supermarket have actually put a gun to a pig's head and pulled the trigger? We're a lot of backseat drivers in humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. When you make the choice to take life, and you do it from a place of deep reverence with an understanding that. So this was a communication that I recently received from the animal kingdom, which was that we're part of the animal kingdom to work in cooperation with the whole, with the systems within the natural world. So the different species and the hierarchy that exists, and that certain animals, their choice, their purpose is to come in as food for others. And they're okay with that. That's their purpose. What they're frustrated with is that we as humans, since we moved out of living in congruence with the natural world, which means that we're not in congruence with ourselves, we are they're no longer able to fulfill their purpose in a way that is rooted in reciprocity. So again, things have to be in a state of congruence for those purposes to be fulfilled in their true essence. So, the mice or the rats, their food, they know that that's what they're here to do. Their purpose is to be food. They're okay with that. And as animals, we all also understand, that's why our nervous systems are designed the way they are, that suffering is going to happen. And that we have protection mechanisms in our body. So when the bobcat takes me down, I can go into feign and I am not going to experience the entire process in my full consciousness or even have full sensory feeling in my body. Our nervous system has gifted us as animals these tools because suffering is inevitable. But what the animals are really, really struggling with is that we now as humans, we create suffering unnecessarily, in excess, and with zero reverence. And that's their issue with us, is that there is no, I am so grateful, fish, that you were able to believe that my fly was a bug and that you bit it. And that now I'm going to quickly end your life and I'm going to appreciate you and share love in every step of bringing your body into, from its own body into my body. And that's medicine. Like that process is medicine, that fish's body coming into my body, that's medicine. And as humans, we're the only ones who have issues with death. They don't. The animal kingdom doesn't. It's okay. But it's the energy or the situational understanding, the lack of consciousness around how we are carrying out that act that is where the natural world says, wow, you guys are really far off. You guys have really stepped, like you're not even reading the same book anymore, a lot of humanity. And that if we could start to make individual choices to swing back, that we'll see the changes happen. I wanted to share that this goes right along with a core principle in the work that I teach humans with horses. It's a principle that my Qigong teacher taught me, and it was like mind blowing when I heard it. And I was like, yeah, that's it. It comes back to the visualization that we were talking about at the very beginning. And the principle is summed up in one word, and the word is haula. Haula. Already accomplished. It's already good. It's perfect. And so haula is a concept that is rooted in the quantum field. But it's the knowing and the practice that, what do I want right now? Well, I would love if all of humanity was reverent and acted in a reciprocal way towards Mother Earth, towards all of the animals and the plant relatives, that we all, humanity was moving through life from a heart-forward place where, not that money doesn't exist, but that the currency that is important is reciprocity, is teamwork, is strength of community, is health, that those are the qualities that are important. And that's what I'd love. That's what I want. So it would be really, really easy for me to focus on a different story, to focus on all the things that are going wrong. This is what's wrong. This is how we have to fix it. How do we heal it? The planet needs healing. Humanity's at a loss. I could go down this rabbit hole of all of the things that live in a place of fear, a space of lack, a space of needing to be changed, fixed, healed because there's something inherently wrong. So my belief then is that things are wrong. My belief isn't what I want it to be. And so the concept of Haula is reaching out into the quantum field, into the timelines that move in all directions across time and space, and holding the story in my head of what the earth looks like, feels like, sounds like in that thing that I want. And every time a thought comes into my mind where I'm like, oh, I wish that this political thing would change, or gosh, I wish that people wouldn't do this, going, oh, I see you thought, I see that story coming up, letting that story pass, and then calling it Haula, already accomplished. I believe that space of humanity that I would like to be present, that I want, it already is present on another timeline. If enough of us can pull that in to right now and to feel it in our bodies, things will shift because they are shifting.
That's so amazing and really synchronistic. In fact, I just had a Qigong teaching, and I'm not a Qigong practitioner. I've done a little bit of it, but had a teaching come up a few days ago about essentially like a meditative walk. And it was one of the most profound experiences that I've had. And I'm not familiar with that term Haula that you mentioned, so thanks for sharing that. But it reminds me of, like, I've been in my own world and my own being, carrying that out in very micro levels within my inner self. And the interesting, really like quite emotional thing as I express that even right now is that this very conversation is a manifestation of those micro principles being carried out into the greater good and existence. And that ripple effect, you mentioned like the stone in the pond, you know, it ripples through, and who knows where this is. I mean, effectively with technology, the podcast is, quote, evergreen. And, you know, who knows who or what picks this up at a later time, and that resonates, and then that causes another and another. And it's just like when we heard your talk on Warwick Schiller's show, and we all know Warwick Schiller is a portal opener, and he's doing his own stuff, and it's just fascinating. So what I'm trying to say is just thank you for breaking that down, and really just wow, it's like a light bulb illuminated and an aha moment that I just had about the inner self and how that actually progresses.
Wonderful. Yeah. And that was like that's the big example. I just flew back to the homestead in Hawaii last week. And since the Warwick Schiller podcast air date, that word resonant, there has been so much resonance with people across this planet from that interview, which has changed my life. But I've been going 4,000 miles a minute. And the moment I sat down on the plane to fly home, to go get to be with my heart herd and my family, and to be on the land, which is my little like vacation or break time that I take every couple months, I got sick right away. And the first thought that came was like, no, this is my time for me where I get to tune out, and I can't be sick. And then I was like, stop. Oh, that's not the story that you want to tell. Like, that would be a really easy story to tell. Pity. That's an injustice. Like, I've worked so hard. I deserve a break. Why is this happening to me? All of these things are tied to that story of, oh, I'm sick. And so instead, I just sat on the plane and I practiced Haula with Qigong form. And so it wasn't that I hope that my throat gets better or I'm bringing in healing, because healing means that something's inherently wrong. It was, I feel softness in my throat. I see a warmth moving through my throat. I feel like I'm open, like all of the things that my throat feels like when I'm not sick or I'm not congested. That I called that in, and not just in my mind's eye, but in my whole body. Like I want to feel, what does it feel like? Remember what it feels like yesterday when your throat wasn't swollen. Bring that feeling in. What does it feel like when you can talk and it's not stressed? Like you don't have to work to get the words out because your throat isn't inflamed. Call Haula in. And I did it for the plane ride, and I did it when I got there for the first day. And I went down for a whole day, but it was really, really fascinating to see that sickness ran each, like, when you get sick, how there's like different phases of the sickness and you kind of, you're like, oh, it's moved to here. Okay, now I've got 2 days here. I ran through each phase of that sickness in 4 to 6 hours. And I was like, oh, it's moving. It's moving. And then I just keep practicing. And so that's on a health level. So when we hear of people healing themselves from autoimmune diseases or stage 4 cancers, and it's the power of belief. Well, belief is biology. So that's what Haula is. It's belief. Do you believe? And do you really believe? Are you going to embody that belief? So we do this with the horses. This is actually how we communicate with the horses. It's creating the story that you want to happen. And then it has to be congruent. So if you're like, I want to ride my horse, and your horse is like, I'm terrified of having a human ride me because I was abused, that's not congruent. So that story doesn't work at that time. You can still keep holding the image of you riding your horse, but you're not attached to the timeline. You know that you are riding the horse. It's already happened somewhere out in time and space. It's already occurring. You might have to do some work, some footwork here in the present reality to bring yourself and your horse into a place of congruence where you can then make a connection, and then you can develop the communication so that story that you're holding in Haula can come in and actually take place in this moment in time. But when you are congruent and the horse is congruent, and you can create this story and then embody it, bring it into your whole entire being. I remember the first day that we did this, that it happened. I watched, and the horses turned and looked at us, and I was like, all right, we're onto something. That's interesting. The Qigong was very serendipitous how it came into my life. It came with a couple other things, and I was like, I don't know. We're just going to throw these things out there with my students. I love my students. They're just on the journey of exploration with me. I'm like, okay, guys, so, we're going to do something way different today. We'll have people laying down in the dirt, or, we're going to do this movement thing, or we're going to start making a bunch of sound, and this is what we're holding in our mind's eye. But that principle of Haula, I've now seen it with clients transform their journey of ending relationships, of leaving careers and jobs, of battling cancer, and how they are approaching going into this second round of treatment. Not as I'm sick or I have cancer, and not as I need to heal myself or get healthy, as I am health. I am nourished. I am full. I am happy. And that's visualization. That's manifestation. But if they taught us that, the systems wouldn't work anymore, which is why it's not taught.
Yeah. The system would implode. I was diagnosed with a pretty rare form of leukemia back in 2017. Rare for my age. The first 2 or 3 years post-diagnosis, I was literally dying. I got to a point late last year, in fact, where I looked up at the sky and I was just like, cancer, just take me. It didn't, at least in the way that I had, I guess, sort of wanted it to at the time. Instead, it took me and swept me completely in a different direction, to where I became an entirely different being. And the things that you're saying, it's really, really quite fascinating to just hear what you're saying and have it just resonate and reverberate just like within my soul in a way that, quite honestly, I don't think I've had something at that level in a conversation with somebody ever in my life. So thank you. If I had to sum up like what we're touching on here, is that we are so incredibly powerful within our own divine spark of being that, man, because I'm sitting here and like largely there's no like side effects of cancer. The last blood tests, the cancer is actually progressing quite rapidly from a medical perspective, but from a living and life perspective, it's not a factor. And in that way, healing is occurring. And what I'm hearing you say is that, okay, so that's like individual Jason, what's going on internally in this. I am just a mere accumulation of things, of food, essentially, that my DNA has now processed into this physical mass that I call Jason. But that's what's going on individually. But what you're saying is that because of that individual process, collectively, it's much more than that. The horses are one big piece of the puzzle to like help us bridge that gap of disconnect.
Yeah. If you look at the timelines of horses and humans, from the time that horses lived at choice on the land and humans lived in congruence with the natural world, and you trace, they match, they parallel completely. The advancement, so as we domesticated humans, as we domesticated horses,
humans need to be domesticated, right?
We, as humans, we began to advance with technology, with agriculture, which in turn meant that we moved away from living in congruence or in connection to nature. We shifted out of living in community systems into nuclear family units. We then, no longer needed the horse as a tool, but also a partner. If your horse was your only mode of transportation, that horse meant a lot to your life. If your horse was your livestock, plowed your field for food, that was how you bartered or traded or existed within the community, those animals meant a lot. And there was reverence and understanding for how the value of that relationship and connection. So as we moved through time from this place where horses lived in the wild with absolute choice, and humans, we also lived in the wild with absolute choice because we looked to the earth and the nature to give us all of our guidance, to where we are now. What the horses are here for and have been here for from the beginning of time is to walk with us as our guide to maintaining congruence. Congruence within ourselves, because they are a mirror and they tell you, nope, you are out of alignment. Your, energy body and your physical body are not connected at all right now. Or your mind is overriding every other system and we've got to back you out of that. So they're this guide to self-congruence, to our congruence within the web of the rest of life. So the rest of the animals, humanity, and then also our congruence within our environment. And their way of life, their deep wisdoms that come from the place beyond this planet, beyond physical reality, out into the field of energy, into the stars. That wisdom is, we have a soul contract, an agreement with horses, which is why you can say the word horse anywhere on the face of this planet, and it brings up a very, very similar energetic vibration and set of words for every human being, because horse represents something very specific. And by returning, what my aim is to do is to teach people that by returning choice to the horse as a physical act, but also as an energetic act. So just acknowledging, like you said, Alyssa, we do a lot of work with horses where deep grief comes up, and it's just like this. You can feel the weight of all horses that ever have been and what's been done to them. And it's just like, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. Like, I will do what I can to write this. And that writing is teaching people to make individual choices, to step back into congruence, to make individual choices, to create reciprocal relationships with other humans, with their food, with the natural world, with their work life, with everything that we do. Find places where there's balance. Find places where there's love. Step into those places of fear with love, and trust that even though you can't see something with your eyes, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We don't question that love exists. We can't see it, but we feel it. And so that's, to me, the proof that anybody needs to come back to a place of remembering their original guidance system, remembering the awareness that they were born with. To find congruence is just the greatest things in life we can't see or touch. They exist.
And that is absolutely profound. To piggyback on your mention of congruence and how the horses help us, I guess, reach that congruence. Dad and I are still relatively new to horses. We've got our first horse in 2019 and have been, doing it since then. We lost Mocha in 2021 due to a hip fracture, and I've never really thought about it like this until now, but I feel like her death was, in a lot of ways, her way of expressing our lack of congruence within her and Cody at the time, so our herd, Dad and my relationship, and overall our role in the collective consciousness of humans and beings as it is. Mocha died because of a hip fracture, and it's still largely undetermined how she fractured her hip, but our vet said that it literally shattered like glass, and he had to euthanize her. Mocha's death was a catalyst to getting our Mustang Willow, who came to us essentially wild, and because of her, we changed our entire, the way we train and the way we see and the way we be with them. And none of that, I don't think, would have been possible without Mocha's death. So it's fascinating that you bring that up.
Yeah, our entire life and just who we are changed.
Yeah, dramatically. And it begs a question, do you feel like horses pick and choose certain souls within their collective conscious to come down and teach these certain human souls these lessons? Or do you feel like it's just like coincidence?
I don't think anything is coincidence. I think that everything is, in every moment, every second that we're in this body, and there's billions of us on this planet, and that's just talking humans. We're not even talking about the choices that the trees and the flowers and the birds and the whales are making. Every choice in every second that's made splits off into another set of infinite possibilities. And so I think that we make choices. I made choices, and every choice I made up until the moment that I drove by Honeybee was getting Honeybee was still up in the air until the choice that I made right before. Like, all of those choices had started to head me on that path, but I could have made a different choice, and it could have taken me in a totally different way. I do believe, because it is a very prevalent pattern and theme that I see between horses and clients, that the horses that come into our lives, that whether we choose them for what seems like a surface level reason, because of their breeding, their color, because they're going to be some athlete and we're doing some sport, or because we have this heart connection like I did with Honey. Horses come in and we choose which ones to become guardians of, because there is some connection, some cord that needs to be worked through. And sometimes those horses work through it with the person, and then the next person comes along. Sometimes you work through it, and the actual thing that has to be worked through is the death, like Mocha. Sometimes it is, I think, us at a place, this is the newest, kind of revelation that the horses have shown in the work, is that when you're in a place of congruence as a human, you actually get to start being the special human for the horse who's in need. So it goes both ways. As I think sometimes the human needs the horse, and sometimes the horse needs the human, because really we've been walking alongside each other for millennia. And if we're not walking alongside each other in a reciprocal way, then we're missing the whole point. We're missing the whole thing. And so coincidence is a series of choices that set you up for something that feels super aligned. Coincidence is just alignment with what your spirit's saying. Yes, you made the choices that you were coming into this life to try to make. Good job. Here's a little nugget so you keep going down that path and you don't get discouraged. That's what I believe coincidence is.
Thank you for mentioning that. That brings up a whole new perspective for me on that form of thinking around coincidence. It's like your words are so beyond like wise and profound. It's like I can't even express my amount of like thanks and gratitude toward you. Like you're such a light in this world, and I see it and I feel it, and it's such an honor to be sitting here having this conversation with you.
Likewise. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to send you guys a book because actually you, Jason, the form of Qigong that I practice and my teacher, she decided to continue down the path and study and become an instructor because her son, when he was 3, was diagnosed with leukemia. And they basically said he has no chance. And he's alive and has children today. And Qigong is what shifted that. And so it's powerful. Our belief is the most powerful thing we have. And when we become aware and what horses make you do, and if you're not aware of it, you're creating the reality that you don't really want. You're creating reality all the time, but they put us in a place where we have the opportunity to look at the stories we're telling ourselves. What are your beliefs? And you can have a belief in your mind, but that's not actually where your belief lives. Your belief lives in Pico, just behind your navel. Your belief lives in your heart. Your brain is just a big mixer of chemicals that gets to make sense of all the things that are happening in the places that are our actual being. So I'm going to send you guys a book because I feel like I'm like, okay, I think that the Qigong is for everybody. I'm like, wow, it's a really powerful practice. And, it's an ancient Chinese practice, but the Chinese were really, really phenomenal at recording things. And if we've had cataclysms over time, a lot of knowledge was probably just like written or documented knowledge lost. It's the same energy source that healers of the land and shamans are using, all over the world. This is just a way for our cognitive brain to grasp it. But it's been so transformative in my personal life, with my animals, with students, that I want to share that book with you guys. So,
well, thank you so much for that. Yeah, Qigong is really, really interesting, and I've been going through this 21-day interfaith challenge pod, and we're like on day 8 today out of 21, and it's breaking down like, it's just each day is a different faith-based teaching. I'm reminded of this, and I thought I had come up with this idea on my own, but it wasn't. It was just, but this like one peak, many paths. There's an infinite number of paths up to a particular mountain peak. I mean, if you look at like technology, like you could use a helicopter, you can hike, you can cross country ski, you can, but there's just an infinite number of ways. And using that analogy, the peak is like what we would call God or source or, consciousness, love, those pinnacle ideas. And it's really fascinating to me because of the horses. They have been a great like shepherd and helper to me in this way, but also the cancer has been a great catalyst and sort of like teacher to help me shed blockages and conditioning that was basically telling me that peak didn't exist. And now I'm finding that in so many different ways, and just experiencing different beliefs and cultures. They're all really the same. They're just expressed different ways, and it's beautiful. And Alyssa will tell you, like, I used to kind of like, I don't want to use the word hate, but it used to like really not like people. And now I'm just like in love with people. I'm so fascinated by like our existence and like the yoga term, namaskar. And it's just like, I see that infinite divinity, that spark of light within you as is within me. And I think the more I work with horses, every time I go out, and maybe you can follow up with this, like every time I go out and just like stand next to a horse, it's like I feel that.
Yeah. When our conscious awareness, me as Jordanna, realized, and it wasn't even realized, when I knew, like without a shadow of a doubt, like, oh, there is something more. This is a very, very physical reality, is very illusory. There's something more. The horses, because again, that's Haula. That it's not just it's a belief that's embodied. It's fully in my being at that point. The horses then feel that shift and they're like, right, welcome home. Okay, so welcome home. Now we can continue to walk together. Up until that point, you're not walking together. You're living in two completely different awarenesses. And when you get to come back to that place of home, of knowing that I am you and you are me and we are one and we are nothing and we are everything all at the same time, there is no separation, then everything becomes so rich, so beautiful, so filled with love. And even when fear arises or when stress comes in, you have this knowing that just can wash over anything and be like, it's going to be okay, because it is okay. And it's, and so the horse, because their archetypal energy is of strength, freedom, power, majesty, wisdom. Like when we come home to that knowing of our divine essence as being energy, we then get to experience all of those qualities. That is probably why we got involved with horses in the first place, because we wanted to feel those things. And I get to watch people have that moment. And it's so special. And I love that, like you just explained it. That's it. It's this, when you know the divine spark, and then you go out to the horses and they're just like, yeah, hey. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so great. Isn't there a saying that stems from Qigong, I think, is I have arrived, I am home?
Maybe. It sounds like something that would come from a wisdom tradition. Yeah.
Well, I'm actually kind of curious. When we first started this interview, you mentioned the Breyer horse.
Oh, yeah.
Did you have one or two like favorites that you clung to that just spoke to you more than the others?
I did. So I don't even remember if they had names. I'm sure at the time they had names, like I'd named them. But one of them was a like leopard blanket Appaloosa. So his whole hindquarters were like blue roan leopard Appaloosa spots. And then another one that was jet black. And they were my favorite. And the Appaloosa was huge. And that was my second and third horse. Was I had an Appaloosa named Pearl. And then I had a Clydesdale cross named Contessa. And so big black, and then my spotty. Yeah, and they were, if I would still have them. My mom gifted them to another young girl when I was a teenager. And when I found out about it in my early 20s, it was like a midlife crisis. What do you mean you got rid of my prior horses? They were like something I was going to take to the grave. I loved them. So what was your favorite? Do you still have yours?
I have, so my collection didn't start until later, because I didn't find out about them until later. But yeah, I have, I think 3 proper Breyer horses and then 2 other models. I don't really know what brand they are, but the 3 that I have, one of them is an Appaloosa of sorts, and she looks to have more of an Arabian-like face. She's very athletic. She's running. Her name is S'mores. I named her early when I got her. But I was gifted her by Mocha's trainer, actually. And then Dad gifted me for Christmas one year a book set with a model, and the title was Wild Blue, and Blue is her story is she's a Mustang, she's a wild Mustang, and so she kind of came, I don't know, I think she's like a catalyst to my story in a way, because Willow's a Mustang and Willow's like my heart horse. And then I have Mini Mocha that was painted to look just like Mocha after Mocha passed away, and she's just, I think having that model was a huge it helped me grieve Mocha in a lot of ways, just having that. And she has a little necklace or whatever of Mocha's fur, or Mocha's hair rather, and so that was that. And they sit on my desk, and I love them. But yeah, I was curious, just, there's a connection there.
I had like a trunk of them, like a huge trunk. It was like I drug it around the house everywhere.
That's incredible. Yeah, no, they're cool. I want more of them, but they're fun.
You have real horses, right? We have real horses now.
It's So that it'd be really cool to get a herd painted just like my herd, so that I could have like mini models of, I have a mini Mocha, need a mini Willow and a mini Grace and a mini Cody. So, but yeah, no, the real ones, the living ones, they bypass the need for anything else, really. They're awesome. And then the last and final question I have for you before we wrap up is, what is your favorite way to reinforce your horses?
That is a great question. My favorite way to reinforce my horses. I talk to my horses just like I talk to my family. I believe that they reciprocate that communication back at me, and that there's no, just because they're in horse form and they're four-legged, doesn't mean that I have any different of a connection with them than I do with my mom or my siblings. And that's reinforces the equality in the relationship. And for them, they have acknowledged that allows them to continue to show up and to choose to do things that I ask them to do that are very unnatural for horses to do. Because it's this, I would ask a family member to do that, or someone that I love to. There's no one's above anyone else. So just talking to them like a loved one.
God, that is absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much.
Sharing, being incredible. This has been a wonderful talk.
Yeah, I could talk to you for hours upon hours, I'm sure.
It was a great conversation.
A recurring thing on the podcast, but this one is exceptionally powerful and synchronistic, and like it really like has edified my soul in so many ways.
Oh,
and
likewise.
Wow, it's going to take me some time to process it, and in post-production, I'm looking forward to that too.
It's almost like I feel like I already know you, even though it's like we've just met. I feel this connection. I don't know. I felt that after listening to you on work show. I remember telling Dad, I'm like, we need to talk to her. We need to talk to her. Like, I just feel a connection.
Well, we do already know each other because we're just the same energy. So it's just a resonant feeling. It's the same resonant feeling that we have with the horses when it's like, oh, I'm home. It's that we're picking up on something that we know in our DNA, in our core, in every energy fiber in our being, that's like, oh, that feels like a truth, or that feels like, that feels like a part of me. And so I'm so grateful to actually meet you as Alyssa and you as Jason, but we're already connected.
That's so great. How can people get in touch with you? We'll definitely post links to your social media and website, but do you have a preferred method? Do you like people to just reach out by email? Or?
So we have a website, choicetribe.com. You can get in touch with me that way. It's got links to the email and a question box on there too. What I've really, really enjoyed since the Warwick podcast, my most favorite reach outs that I've received, have actually been people just sending me a video message or an audio clip, to be able to connect just the way that we are connecting now. Like when you can see someone and hear their words, it has a deeper level of, it feels familiar. And it's a way to create a friendship and create a bond. I respond to emails. Right now my inbox is full, but I do get through them. because I have actually just started responding to people through audio or video recordings, because it's easier for me to just pop on and talk out an answer or share with someone a response to their email than to type it out. So if you want to get in contact with me, shooting me a message on social media, Instagram or Facebook at Choice Tribe or Choice Horsemanship, or popping something into an email, that is my new preferred method for contact.
That's great. Yeah, I love that idea, because it's all what I'm finding. The more vulnerable and the more willing to connect that we can utilize the benefits of technology. Like, we're all using technology right now, and it's fantastic. We didn't have to jump on a plane and go, across the country or around the world or whatever. And here we are, having a great conversation. But it starts with this idea of connection and being vulnerable with one another and actually being human. And that will supersede the negativity, in my mind at least, that social media tends to have. So that's part of my mission about this podcast, and a request and a kind of sending it out there to the cosmos and to humans. Like, we love to connect as well. So for anybody, if you have a story that you just want to talk about, preferably if it has something to do with horses, because it is the Reinforce the Horse podcast. But we haven't done a whole heck of a lot of we don't talk about horse training and methods and all this kind of stuff. It's more of life, spirituality, and horses and how they help us in that mission. So feel free to reach out to us as well.
Yeah, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. I am so grateful. I can't even put words to it. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.